If you want a segmented bar chart in Google Sheets, you first need to make a two-way table. So I have asked students if they play sports and if they play instruments. I need to create a two-way table. So one option is to count by hand how many students said yes and yes, or no and yes, or yes and no and no. If you don't want to do that, you can use the count ifs function. So that's equals count ifs. You first want to highlight your first set of data. So I'm going to highlight the sports responses. Then you type a comma, and then what am I looking for? I am trying to count how many people said yes, they play a sport. So put that in double quotes, comma, then I'm going to select my second data set. If I highlight the instruments column, what response am I looking for in terms of instruments? I also want yes. So this will count how many students said yes, they play a sport, and yes, they play an instrument. And you can repeat that for the other combinations of yes and no. If you want to be a little bit more advanced, I'm going to change how I have my table set up. I'm going to put sports up here and just change this to yes and no. Let's change this to yes and no over here. Now, if I would like to be able to copy and paste my formula, I can start back with count ifs, sports, comma. I want to refer to this label. The value in cell E2 is yes. So I'm going to count how many times yes comes up in the sports column. And instruments, comma, this one, cell D3. So this will count how many times the value in cell E2 occurs in column A and the value in D3 occurs in column B. As mentioned in a previous video, if I try to copy and paste this formula to the other cells, it's going to not do what I want it to do. So when I copied it to the right, all of the values in my formula shifted one column over. So now it's trying to count things in column B and column C, which is not what I want. So I need to add some dollar signs here so that when I copy and paste, values will not change. I always want A2 to A66 to be my first data set, and I always want B2 to B66 to be my second data set. Now, I still have an issue here if I try to copy and paste, because now the reference for A2 to A66 and B2 to B66 didn't change, but the cells that I'm referring to, F2 and E3. F2 is no, which is what I want, but E3 is the number 13. That's not what I want. So this first value here, E2, I need that to be able to change columns, but I always want it to be the second row. So I'm only going to put a dollar sign in front of the 2, not in front of the E. Here where I have D3, I want the opposite. I need to be able to change the row, but I always need it to refer to column D. So now, if I copy and paste this over, I'm referring to A2 to A66, B2 to B66, referring to cell F2, which is where I have the word no, and cell D3, which is where I have the word yes. That's what I want to happen. I can also paste it in the other two columns. or the other two cells. Looking here, A2 to A66, referring to cell E2, which is where I have the word yes, B2 to B66, D4, which is where I have the word no, A2 to A66, referring to F2, which is where I have the word no, and B2 to B66, referring to cell D4, where I have the word no again. If that's a little too advanced for you, then don't do that. Just type the words yes and no instead of trying to refer to specific cells. After you have your two-way table, you can highlight this, insert chart. It gives you a side-by-side bar chart. If that's what you want, great. If not, under setup, where it says stacking, if you change it to 100%, it will give you a stacked bar chart. Now, unfortunately, it just says yes and no, and we need to figure out which one is sports and which one is instruments. So if you look back at your table, you can figure out that each column represents the response to the instrument question. So if you go under setup, chart and axes titles, horizontal axis title, I can say, do you play an instrument? Then under legend, I'm going to move my legend over here. And then I can double click here if I want to edit there we go, the label here, and I can say no sports and yes sports. Okay, and there you have your segmented bar chart.